A couple weeks ago, I talked about what I think you should know about Malcolm X. Today, I want to talk about what I think you should know about Dr. Martin Luther King and some of my resources for this video and some of my studying on Dr. King have come from. One is the biography by Jonathan Igg. And I think it's important to continue to read updated biographies about Dr. King because more information is coming out about him year by year. Also, a book by Dr. James Cone about Martin, Malcolm in America. Highly recommend this. He talks about the differences between the two, the similarities between the two, and how they both had a significant impact on American culture, American history, of course. And the last book is an autobiography by Dr. Martin Luther King that was edited by Claiborne Carson. I just have the digital copy of this book, but I highly recommend this as well. So based on what I've learned about Dr. King recently, here are some things that I think you should know about him. Number one is that the name given to him at birth was Michael King Jr. Martin Luther King and his father, Michael, were both preachers who were significantly influenced by Martin Luther, who was a significant leader in Christian history, responsible for the Protestant Reformation and most of the Protestant churches that you know about today. And that's interesting to know because Dr. King changed his name before his heavy involvement in the civil rights movement. So it's almost as if changing his name set up the trajectory of his life, because throughout his life, he was a reformer and a protester. And Martin Luther was a protester in different ways for different reasons, but there's some similarities between these two. 500 years from now, we're going to be looking at Dr. King and his work and his life like we look at Martin Luther and the Christian church. There's a lot of similarities and parallels, so it's very fitting that him and his father both changed their names to Martin Luther from Michael King. Something else you need to know about Dr. King is that he grew up in a family of preachers. So his dad was a preacher. Grandpa was a preacher. His father-in-law was a preacher. His brother was a preacher. There were just preachers all around him. So he grew up in the church, and it's interesting hearing his story. He grew up saying things like, I don't believe in the literal resurrection of Jesus. He was someone that was pushing beyond the bounds of where he was placed in his Christian sphere, like from an early age. I remember reading about him kind of being embarrassed about some of the things that happened at his church because he didn't see things the way that they saw things. So he was pushing against the envelope from a young age, and he was very smart, which leads me to my next point. He had a brilliant mind and an excellent memory. Dr. King finished high school like at age 15, 16. He finished college by the age of 20. And I'm pretty sure he had his doctorate done by like 24, 25, 26, something like that. So he had a brilliant mind and an excellent memory, which leads me to the talk about plagiarism. This is a tricky thing with him because when you have a memory like he did and you start to recite things, maybe there's some fuzzy lines between, is that my thought or is this a thought that I remembered? I want to say that was the case for his dissertation and some of the other places where he plagiarized. Maybe there were some times where he was doing that deliberately. I don't know. We might say that some of the times where he was plagiarizing, he just memorized the information he was given and recited it, and maybe forgetting that this was not him, this was somebody else. But then I think a point could be made, well, if you remember the original lines, why not remember the source and the name of the source? But what I'm trying to say is maybe we can give grace, especially if you're trying to look at this man more holistically. During his civil rights activity, he would often be hospitalized because of fatigue, depression, and various other medical issues. This is something important because we just get to hear about all the stuff externally that he was doing, but we don't get to read about or learn about the internal things he was dealing with. He was a man that was plagued by his calling. He was plagued by what he was convinced that God was leading him to. This led him to sleep for 3 hours a night, to have terrible habits, to be affected deeply by his mental worries, threats on his life consistently, especially towards the end of his life. So to know that you could die in any moment, maybe even die in a brutal way, that weighs on you. So he was carrying so much. And when you're carrying all that weight, it takes a toll on you mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. So this is a man that not only did a lot of things externally for the civil rights movement, but he was someone that was carrying a lot of things internally. This is the reality that Dr. King dealt with. Something else that you should know about him is that he struggled with conflict in his personal relationships. This is so funny to think about because as you hear him presenting his speeches and pushing against the societal norms that were unfair and unjust, you would assume that this posture would be in every aspect of his life, right? Maybe you could assume that. But no, this is a man that was able to deal with conflict on the social front, but struggle with conflict on the personal front. Some might even call him a people pleaser. And the people around him, they knew about his struggles with dealing with conflict. Something else you should know about Dr. King was that he was a minimalist, wearing simple clothing, living beyond his means. If you look at the photos of Dr. King, if you look at the videos of him, he's usually wearing the same type of suit, like a black suit, black tie. That was a common thing. He wore simple clothing because he was a simple man in a lot of ways. Toward the end of his life, I read this somewhere that he and his family moved out into a lower income part of town deliberately so that he could relate more to the people that he was trying to advocate for. And I think something like that is admirable. Even hearing about him and his interactions with his wife would often want maybe newer whatever, but he was very intentional about trying to make things simple for multiple reasons. He wanted to be sure that he was channeling his funds in appropriate ways and also being an example of maybe a simple way to live for the sake of others. And I think there's a lot we can learn from his posture there. He would often give mock eulogies to his friends because of the dangerous nature of his work. Like I said earlier, this was a man that was constantly receiving death threats, especially towards the end of his life. He even got a letter from the FBI. It wasn't explicitly from the FBI, but they encouraged him to take his own life because of some skeletons they had on him, and they were trying to threaten him to end his work in the civil rights movement. So it's just something like that. There's a lot of people that wanted him dead, and the same was true for those that were around him. So he would give mock eulogies to the people around him to lighten the mood a little bit, I think. Because that's a lot of tension. That's a lot of weight to carry. Like, I could die in any moment in a brutal way. Someone can shoot me. Someone can come up to me and stab me in the chest, which is something that happened to him. He was signing autographs when he released his first book, and a lady came up to him and asked, "Hey, are you Dr. King?" And he said yes, and she stabbed him. If he would have coughed, the knife would have pierced part of his heart that he couldn't recover from. He wouldn't be able to survive that amount of bleeding. I think he found peace with his death long before he died. Something else you should know was that he was involved in various extramarital activities. I struggled to put this in here, but I think it's important because everyone around him knew about these things. I think his wife may have known. I think she struggled with that, but she also was very careful because she wanted to present her husband in a favorable light, which I think is admirable, which is something why I struggle to bring it up. But I think it's important too, because I think it's important to recognize the humanity of this individual. And you can see that through some of the struggles that he dealt with internally, but relationally too, you might be able to see that understanding that, hey, though he was important for our society, he really struggled and was plagued by a lot of things on a personal and individual level. Something else you should know is that towards the end of his life, his political views became more radical and criticized.
From every mountainside, let freedom ring, and if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. And don't let anybody make you think that God chose America as his divine messianic force to be a sort of policeman of the whole world. God has a way of standing before the nations with judgment, and it seems that I can hear God saying to America, "You are too arrogant. If you don't change your ways, I will rise up and break the backbone of your power, and I'll place it in the hands of a nation that doesn't even know my name."
So many argue that the reason why Dr. King was assassinated was not because of his civil rights activities, because he was engaged in civil rights activities for 13 years. But he was killed because of his stance against the Vietnam War. which was a very sensitive topic during his time. And that made him a very hated figure. I've heard it say that he was the most hated figure a year before he was shot. So it wasn't just his views of the Vietnam War, but it's also as he started to do work in the North and work towards alleviating things like poverty. I think his scope got a lot bigger. Maybe he started off with like the civil rights and African American rights, but then it became something bigger than that. And I think he even opened up his radical nature. Not that he abandoned nonviolence and his nonviolent approach, but I think if Malcolm X would have stayed alive and Dr. King would have stayed alive, their worlds would have merged a lot more. I think their views probably would have merged a lot more as well. And ironically, both of these individuals were killed at 39 years of age. Just imagine a 80-year-old Dr. King or an 80-year-old Malcolm X. Something else you should know about Dr. King is that when he was shot at the age of 39, he had the heart of a 60-year-old. And there's a couple things that I want to say about this. I think it's because of the pressures that he had being a civil rights leader. I mean, that's a lot of weight that you're carrying every day that is going to affect every part of you, including your heart. He also was a smoker, and this is something that he didn't want people to know. One of the things that happened when he was shot and killed, someone was intentional about taking the cigarettes out of his pocket, so people didn't know that, especially children didn't know that he was a smoker. So this is something I'm sure affected him. But of course, the stress of being a civil rights leader, that's something that weighed on his heart as well. But something else I want to note is that this man was an old soul. I'm not sure if it's because maybe I got to get past 39 and maybe I can see him as more of a man of his age, but I've always held him pretty high. Like, it just seems like he had an old soul. And I think part of that was his upbringing and his brilliance and his sharp mind. I think that helps you. Maybe something about his heart. I think things weighed heavy on him, heavier than others. Maybe we can say that. And because of that, he literally had a literal heart of a 60-year-old when he was killed. And there's a lot more I can say about this man, but I think this is a good start. And I would encourage you to do your own research, read some of these books that I recommended, listen to some of his speeches, go beyond the I have a dream speech, because there's so much more to this man than one of those speeches that he gave. And I think you could learn a lot and be blessed by a lot. Thank you for watching.